Hello, everybody. My name is Happy, and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reaction channel. Today, we'll be taking a look at Ivan the Terrible, Feeding the Evil Russian Tsar by Tasting History with Mac Miller. As always, I will have a link to the original content in the description down below. Please head over to Mac Miller's channel and show him a little love and appreciation for this video if you like what you see here. Alright, with that said, I've talked about Ivan the Terrible a couple times in previous videos on Russian history, but I always kind of wanted to do a deeper dive into who Ivan was, how he got his reputation for being terrible, and just getting a better feel for the guy, because he's actually a very complicated individual with a very interesting life story, if you want to put it that way, but very complicated and very nuanced. Sometimes he reminds me as a less crazy version of Caligula. The first half of their lives are remarkably similar. Both Caligula and Ivan are going to lose their parents young. They're going to be raised in an environment of political intrigue, with people dying all around them and people trying to manipulate them in power plays. Both of them are going to start out as good emperors, and then they're both going to have a severe illness, and after the illness, they are going to get a reputation for being insane, crazy, terrible, put it mildly. The thing I think that separates the two is that Ivan the Terrible does go through a terrible phase. Absolutely, he does. But unlike Caligula, there's a lot of evidence that Ivan was struggling with guilt, with remorse, with trying to contain whatever monster was inside of him. Whereas I never got that feeling with Caligula, quite the opposite. But I find him a very fascinating and interesting character, a very tragic character. There's an alternate history out there where Ivan doesn't go down this dark path that he's kind of known for. And there's a reason why in Russia he's often remembered as a almost heroic figure, or at the very least an iconic figure where what he represents is more than just the terror and the terrible part. He represents something that transcends that. So let's talk about Ivan. And I saw he did this fairly recently, Mac Miller, I mean. And I thought we'd just take a look at this. We'd learn how to cook while we're learning about Ivan. And I think from what I saw looking at the description, this is going to be making cabbage Pirozhki. I had cabbage Pirozhki when I was in Moscow, and I actually liked the stuff. It was quite interesting. So I would love to make some of my own. I will never be able to make it as pretty as the thumbnail that he did looked, but yeah, let's just get into this and see where this goes. I'm kind of curious.
Sometimes a person can be so cruel, so monstrous, so terrible that it actually becomes part of their name, like Ivan the Terrible, notorious Russian Tsar of the 16th century. But even an evil despot's got to eat, and that's why I'm going to be making one of the most popular foods of 16th century Russia, cabbage Pirozhki.
I could never make it look that pretty. Can I make it? Sure, I've actually made stuff like this before, but never looking that pretty.
So thank you to Bombas for sponsoring this video as we ask the question, why was Ivan so terrible? This time on Tasting History.
All right.
Ivan Vasilievich, better known in English as Ivan the Terrible, was crowned the first Tsar of Russia in 1547.
So yes, he was the first person crowned, as others had had the title before him. His grandfather notably did, and so did his father, but that was just a title they assumed. They were never crowned as Tsar. And the cap that Ivan wears when he is crowned is the cap of Monomuk. It is, according to Russian lore anyway, a gift from the Byzantine Empire. It's argued that it's probably more likely something taken from one of the Khanates, one of the remnants of the Mongol horde. But the lore behind it is that it was from the Byzantine Empire, and it symbolizes their connection to the Byzantine, or more specifically to the Roman Empire. This is where we're in a period of the Third Rome, where Muscovy is seen as the continuation of the Byzantine Empire after the collapse of Constantinople.
And just to put that into perspective with the rest of European history, that is the same year that Henry VIII died, and almost 40 years after Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel.
Interesting he mentioned Henry VIII, because Ivan has something in common with Henry VIII as well, and that is the number of wives that he goes through at an alarming pace.
So while most of Europe was well into the Renaissance, Russia under Tsar Ivan was...
One moment.
...very much still medieval.
Sorry, I got a hair or something stuck in my mouth. I don't know where that came from. Let me go back. Sorry.
Into the Renaissance, Russia under Tsar Ivan was very much still medieval.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that when it comes to medieval food, usually we know a lot about what the kings and the emperors ate, and very little about what the common folk ate. But in Russia, it's exactly the opposite.
Yep,
well, there are descriptions of Ivan or Ivan, I'll probably go back and forth, Ivan's feasts at different times. It almost never talks about exactly what food he was eating. But during his reign, something called Domostroi, which was a household management book, was published, and it does talk about a lot of the foods that the more common people, wealthy common people, but still common people, were eating. It's not really full of recipes, but it does give some good descriptions.
Okay, so the Domostroi, let's talk about that a little bit. It literally is what he kind of said. It is an instruction booklet on how to manage your household, all aspects of it. What foods to serve, how to serve them, how to manage your religious affairs at home, how to manage your family, how to discipline your family, the responsibilities of each family member. I've got a copy of it. Let me pull this up real quick. Give me a moment and I will see if I can get it. I've got it on Kindle, so let me get it off my phone. I'll be right back. All right. Just for fun, let's talk about the Domostroi. So, Chapter 36. Here is the title of Chapter 36. I think this will give you an idea of what kind of book this is. Instructions to women and servants on drunkenness and on secrets, which you should never keep. How you should not listen to servants' lies or calumnies without correcting them. How to correct them with fear. And your wife also. Ow. And how to be a guest and how to manage your household in every way. This is just one chapter title, and it's got a lot of chapters. Just for fun, let's read the first paragraph or so. I do have progressive glasses, so if you see me doing this a lot, that's going to be why. So, a woman should never, under any circumstances, drink alcohol, wine, mead, or beer, nor should she receive it as a present. Liquor should be kept in the cellar or the ice house. A woman should drink very weak beer or kvass, both at home and in public. So, sorry, ladies, no more alcohol except really watered down beer or kvass, which is children's beer, is what they commonly call it in Russia. It is I've made kvass just for fun of it. What you do is you take leftover rye bread and you mix it you bottle it with some water and you ferment it. And it makes kind of it's kind of a beer-like thing, but it's very, very, very weak alcohol. Very strong rye flavor. But you can buy bottles of kvass right where you get soda pop if you're in Russia, soft drinks. It'll be there with the Pepsi and the Coke and all that. But it does have a slight alcoholic content. So, yeah, fun stuff. If women come visiting, do not give them alcohol, nor should you, your own women or maids drink to the point of drunkenness in public or at home. A wife should not eat or drink without her husband's knowledge, nor conceal food or drink from him, nor should she have secrets from her husband. So I think that'll give you an idea of what kind of book this is. But yeah, it's got everything you want to know about running your household. How to teach your servants to run errands without gossiping. How a wife must consult her husband and ask his advice every day. How women should act while visiting and what she should talk about with guests. The mistress must oversee her servants' domestic work and crafts every day. How she must watch her own behavior. So, anything you want to know about the household, it's in the Domostroi. It was supposedly written by a priest by the name of Sylvester, who was a close advisor of Ivan the Terrible, and it was released during the reign of Ivan the Terrible. So, yeah, I'm glad he brought that up because I actually got a copy of it years ago. Well, yeah, years ago, because when I was started working on famine in Russia, that kept coming up as some place to go to learn about food customs and so on. So I ended up getting a copy of it. Interesting book. I've never read it all the way cover to cover, but I have skimmed through a lot of chapters. It's fascinating.
Like something that probably actually would have been on Tsar Ivan's table would be swan basted with honey, swan giblets mixed with saffron and croutons, swan neck spiced with saffron. They put croutons on the swan's neck also. Around here, the croutons are made of white bread and fried in butter.
All right.
Not exactly a recipe, and finding swan is pretty much impossible, as it should be. So I looked at two other foods that were very common and would have been available to pretty much everyone, despite how wealthy they were. And that is the many types of fish soup that they had, and small pies filled with mushrooms, poppy seeds, kasha, turnips, cabbage, or whatever else God sends. These small pies, which could also have fish or fruit or meat or pretty much anything inside, were called and are called Pirozhki. That is not the same as a pierogi, which is a type of dumpling from Poland, but Pirozhki just meaning a small pie. Actually, it means multiple small pies. A singular is a pirozhok, and then a singular large pie is a pirog. Sadly, the Domostroi does not give us an actual recipe for these hand pies, but it does give us a clue as to what the breading on the outside would be. When the servants bake bread, order them to set some of the dough aside to be stuffed for pirozhki. It's a start. Now, the common people...
So basically, we're talking about bread dough, so it's just basically bread. It's not going to be like what we think of as a pie crust.
People would have probably had rye bread, but Tsar Ivan would have definitely been eating wheat bread at this time. And lucky for me, the recipe has not really changed over the years, at least from the 18th century when we start to get recipes for this kind of thing. It's pretty much the same thing as it is now. So as long as the ingredients were around in the 16th century, I feel comfortable using them.
Yeah, and we're talking about mid to late 15th century for Ivan.
So I am going to make one of the fillings.
1500s, mid to late 1500s.
That is most common in Russia today and would have been common then as well,
Right.
and that is cabbage and onion pirozhki, for which you will need a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of cooking oil. Poppy seed oil was actually what was being used mostly in Russia at the time, but you could just use olive oil. It's going to be a lot easier to find. Then 1 large yellow onion, diced up, 2 cloves of garlic, minced up fine, 1 medium head of cabbage, about 2 pounds. Remove the outside leaves and chop it into thin strips or even small pieces, and leave the stalk because that is going to be too firm to use in this recipe. Then 2 tablespoons of butter, a quarter cup of fresh dill chopped fine, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of pepper. So start by heating the oil in a large pot over a medium-high heat, and then add the onion and coat it in the oil, then toss in the salt and let the onion cook in a single layer for about 5 minutes. Then add in the garlic and continue to cook for another minute, and then reduce the heat to medium-low and make sure that the onions are in a single layer covering the bottom of the pot on which you can layer on all of the cabbage. Then set the lid on the pot and let it cook for 30 minutes. And once in a while, lift the lid of the pot, and if you can't hear any sizzling, then just add a little bit of liquid. This can be either more oil or a little bit of water. Either one works. After 30 minutes, the cabbage should be pretty well cooked, and you can add in the butter as well as the pepper and stir all of that in. Let it cook for another 15 minutes and then add the dill. And at this point, you can actually be done with the filling, but if you let it continue to cook for a little while, the cabbage itself will start to caramelize just like the onions, and so it gets a little sweet and it's absolutely delicious. Either way, when it's done to your liking, you can take it off the heat, add a little more salt if you need it, and then let it cool completely. Ideally, you actually put it in the refrigerator because if it is nice and cold, it will be easier to form the pirozhki.
Makes
and
sense.
Speaking of cold, it is getting to that time of year when the leaves start falling and you just feel like getting nice and cozy. So might I suggest a nice cozy pair of socks from today's sponsor, Bombas. Now Bombas is and always has been the place to go if you want incredibly comfortable socks. But now with autumn rolling around, the comfort level is skyrocketing. I just got some socks for autumn and winter, including the merino wool socks, and then the softest sock that I have ever worn in my entire life. They are the Cashmere Blend calf socks, and I swear if they made a full bodysuit out of this material, I would wear it every day. Also, I love that they don't put the seam right at the toe, so I can pull on my socks nice and tight, as I like to do, and I'm not worried about getting any holes. But something I really love about Bombas is that for every item that's purchased, they donate an item to a shelter. And to this date, they have donated over 150 million items, socks, t-shirts, and underwear to those in need. So feel good and do good with Bombas, knowing that your purchase will do some real good. And right now, new customers get 20% off of their first purchase when you use my link in the description, bombas.com/tastinghistory, and use my code tastinghistory20 at checkout. And now let's go and make the dough for our pirozhki, for which you will need 4 cups or 500 grams of flour, 1 packet or 7 grams of dry active yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt, a 1/3 cup or 65 grams of sugar, a 1/2 cup or 120 milliliters of whole milk, a 1/2 cup or 120 milliliters of heavy cream, 2 eggs, and 4 tablespoons or 55 grams of melted unsalted butter. So the first thing to do is activate the dry yeast by mixing it in with about half of the milk and a large pinch of the sugar. Then whisk together the flour, the salt, and the remaining sugar, and then add the activated yeast along with the milk and the cream and the eggs, basically everything but the butter. Mix all of this together until it starts to form a dough, and then turn it out onto the counter and start to knead it. It is a bit sticky at first, but it actually comes together pretty quickly, and in about 10 minutes of kneading, you should have a nice, smooth dough. Then here is where you can start adding in the melted butter, just a little bit at a time. Simply dip your fingers in the butter and rub it into the dough and begin kneading it in. After just a few kneads, the butter should work its way in and you can go back for a little more butter. But at a certain point, it will take longer and longer for that butter to work into the dough, and I'd say if you have to knead it for more than 30 seconds to get it to incorporate, then that is enough butter. Don't feel like you have to use it all up. Rather, use a bit to butter the inside of a bowl, then set the dough in, cover it, and let it rest for 90 minutes to 2 hours or until it has doubled in size. Now, I was actually torn between making the pirozhki and another dish that was very, very common amongst all people in Russia at the time, and that is a fish soup, often called ukha. And there are all kinds of these fish soups. At a single Christmas feast in the Domostroi, it talks about different pies coming out, and then roast meats and roast fish, tons of different caviars, and then blackfish soup.
Yeah, I went to McDonald's in Moscow, and they had Big Macs with caviar. They like their caviar there.
Turbot soup, pike soup spiced with pepper, soup made from perch, roach, bream, carp, beluga, and sterlet. Soup thickened with wheat flour, soup served with bread, sterlet soup, pike perch soup, soup made from sterlet guts.
Oh, yummy.
And as tempting as sterlet guts are, I just had a big ol' hankering for some pirozhki, so that's what I decided to make.
I approve.
So, before we wrap and bake our pirozhki, let's look at another man who really enjoyed his pirozhki, but he did it while terrorizing the people of 16th century Russia.
All right, here we go. Time for history.
So before we look at why Ivan was so terrible, we need to clear something up, and that is the name terrible, or the word terrible. Often you'll see that it is a mistranslation, and it kind of is, but it's also kind of not. What it really is that the word terrible today has different connotations than it did when it was first translated from the Russian Ivan Grozny. It didn't mean awful or cruel, but rather fearsome and formidable. And he was all of those things. He was fearsome and formidable, and awful and cruel. And some say that was kind of baked in from the moment he was conceived.
Ah, the
See, his
curse.
father, Vasily III, Grand Prince of Muscovy, which at that time was a relatively small territory centered in Moscow, divorced his wife when she couldn't give him a child, and then he went on to marry a girl 20 years younger who was able to give him a son, actually 2 sons. But just as the Catholic Church had forbidden Henry VIII from divorcing his wife for pretty much the same reason, so too did the Orthodox Church forbid Vasily.
Yeah, you could not divorce your wife just because she was infertile. That was a no-go.
And just like Henry, Vasily didn't really seem to care. But unlike Henry, he didn't have to go start a whole new church to do it. He just declared that his wife was a witch and moved on, and everybody was like, well, okay, fine.
That's not entirely accurate. That yes, there are stories that that's what he did, but they tend to appear after this by people who had an axe to grind. So there's a lot of question on whether that actually happened or not. She was sent off, I believe, to I can never say this word right because I always want to say covenant. A convent, I believe, is what actually happened. I think the witchcraft charges were something that was added later. But I could be off on that.
However, one priest was said to have cursed him, saying that an evil deed, that being divorce, would produce an evil child.
Being divorced for a unacceptable reason. They had divorce, but just because your wife couldn't give you a kid was not considered grounds for divorce.
And on a dark and stormy night, August 25th, 1530, that evil child was born, and they named him Ivan. Of course, no baby, except for Damien from The Omen, is actually born evil. No, for Ivan to go bad, bad things had to happen to him. And they started with the death of his father when he was...
Well, there's always the off chance he would have gone bad anyway, but in the case of Ivan, a lot of bad things do happen to him.
He was only 3. Now, before he died, his father made the boyars, who were the ruling aristocracy in Muscovy at the time, he made them vow allegiance to his 3-year-old son, Ivan, and they did. But obviously, he couldn't rule at 3 years old, so his mother took over and she ruled in his stead as regent, but then she died when he was 8, probably poisoned by the boyars who had sworn fealty to him. See,
that is also debatable. That's a long-standing rumor and story. Not a lot of evidence to support it, but given the things that are going on at this time, it's certainly not out of the question. There will also be accusations that Ivan's first wife was poisoned by the boyars, and possibly even that Ivan himself was, but certainly his first wife was supposedly poisoned by the boyars. There actually is evidence for that, because they actually exhumed Ivan and his first wife, Anastasia. And they did find elevated levels of both arsenic and mercury in Anastasia, which is rather suspicious. However, mercury was commonly used as a medicine at this time. So the elevated mercury levels, Ivan had them too, with mercury. I don't know if he had the arsenic. She did, but I don't know if he did. But they both had mercury. But that could have been from medical treatments. But mercury, exposure to mercury like that had been known to cause mental issues. Mad as a Hatter originates from the fact that a lot of hatters in the day used mercury compounds to treat their felt hats. And it could literally drive you mad, constant exposure to mercury. So that might be part of what leads to Ivan's reputation, but only a part of it. But let's continue. I just wanted to point out that in the case of Ivan's mother, she absolutely could have been poisoned. There was a lot of political scheming going on at this time. the possibility that she was poisoned is certainly there. I would even say it's quite likely, but as far as I know anyway, there's no proof in her case. There is some circumstantial evidence in the case of Ivan himself, and especially his first wife, Anastasia.
The boyars wanted to control Ivan and his brother, and so then they would control Muscovy. And that's exactly what happened. He and his brother were passed around from boyar family to boyar family as they fought between themselves. And he and his brother were still in the palace, but they were treated really as prisoners. And it was pretty terrible, at least if you believe the letters that are said to have been written by Ivan himself.
So why did he frame it that way, if you believe the letters that are said to be written by Ivan himself? He's talking about some letters that Ivan wrote to his best friend, and I can't remember his name. I think it started with a K, but that's all I can remember. But there's question about how many of these letters, if any, are legitimate. So kind of have to take these letters with a grain of salt until we get better documentation on whether they're all legitimate or which one might be legitimate. Or at least the last I read on the topic, there was a lot of debate about that. So that's what he's referring to, said to have been written.
He wrote, "My brother Yuri of blessed memory and I were brought up like vagrants and children of the poorest. They began to feed us as though we were foreigners or the most wretched menials. What have I suffered through lack of clothing and hunger?" And that sort of upbringing probably planted the seeds for what Ivan would end up becoming. And it didn't take very long for him to start becoming what he would, because at the age of 13, he held a banquet where he stood up and declared that the then regent, the person who was kind of running things, Andrei Shusky, was a traitor and had been mismanaging the area, and so he had him summarily executed.
Yeah, but to be fair, there's pretty good evidence that he was absolutely right that Shusky was a traitor.
Some say that he was beaten to death, and some say he was torn apart by dogs.
And some say he was beaten to death and then fed to the dogs. So, yeah, there's a lot of variations on the death of Shusky. That he was executed is pretty well established. The method of execution and the disposition of the body is a little more debatable.
Either way, that was the end of anyone taking advantage of Ivan, and not long after, he was elevated from prince to Tsar Ivan IV, becoming the first Tsar. Others had actually used that term before. His grandfather did, his father did, but none of them were officially called that, and he was the first to have that as his official title. And it came from the word Caesar or Kaiser, and it was a way for him to make a connection with the Roman Empire, which was
the crown of Monomach. But yeah, that's what I was saying earlier.
Still looming large in the minds of most Europeans, and for a while, they would actually call Moscow the Third Rome. There was obviously Rome, then Constantinople, and now Moscow. Now at first, everything seemed to go pretty well. He made nice with the Orthodox Church, he married a young woman named Anastasia Romanovna, and he laid out a revised law code which curtailed some of the unchecked powers of the boyars over the people.
So Anastasia, how we typically pronounce it here in the United States, and I suspect in other English-speaking areas quite commonly, but in Russia it would be Anastasia. And she's a Romanov, Romanovna. That is just a feminine version of Romanov. She is going to be related to the first Romanov emperor, Mikhail Romanov. He's going to be, I think, a second or third nephew or something like that of Anastasia. And her link to Ivan is going to be one of the reasons that when the Rurik dynasty dies out, they choose the Romanovs to take over. Not the only reason. During the time of trouble, the Romanovs were one of the few boyar families and the princely families that had kind of stayed out of the fray of all the internal politicking and strife and revolt, and they had a very good reputation as being mediators and helping people. but also they had direct ties to Ivan through Anastasia.
Also brought in Russia's first printing press and helped to unify the church, making Muscovy the cultural capital of what was still a rather fractured Russia. Muscovy was still at this time a relative backwater, just kind of the lands around Moscow, and to the west there were powerful kingdoms that were all Catholic, and then to the south and the east there were powerful Islamic Khanates, those being the remnants of the Golden Horde, descendants from another historical villain, Genghis Khan. And it was those areas, the former Mongol areas, that Ivan was determined to conquer first. He created Russia's first standing army, and in 1552...
That would be the Streltsy. That was Russia's first standing army.
Brought the Khanate of Kazan, a place which had withstood at least 10 Russian sieges over the last 60 years, into his domain. To celebrate, he ordered a new cathedral built, the iconic St. Basil's, which still stands to this day.
Yeah, been there. It's really impressive. This is your iconic symbol of Russia for, I think, a lot of people outside of Russia. When we think of Russia, this is what we think of. And whenever news channels or any travel brochures or anything like that are trying to symbolize Russia, especially Moscow, this is the image you're almost always going to see. It was quite impressive. It was a lot smaller than I expected it to be, which isn't to say that it was tiny. It just wasn't as big as my imagination had made it out to be. So I was a little disappointed on that. I thought it would be much bigger, but it was still quite the sight to see. I was quite happy that I visited that.
Ivan must have been on cloud 9. If he kept this up, he would go down in history known as Ivan the Great.
No, he wouldn't, because that would have been his grandfather. He would have had to, excuse me, he would have had to come up with something different.
But we know that that's not what happened, so what went wrong? Well, it all started when he got sick. And
I would argue with that slightly. By all accounts, by all accounts that I've read, he and his wife, Anastasia, were very close and very devoted to each other. I would argue that the first turning point for Ivan would be her death. She dies shortly before he gets sick. So she dies, and then he gets extremely, extremely sick. So I guess you kind of see them as kind of happening back to back, and they're both devastating blows to him.
And if you watched my video recently on Caligula, it's kind of crazy how many parallels there are between...
I'm glad I'm not the only one that sees this. I've always thought this. So, yeah, go on,
Ivan and Caligula, especially in the early part of their lives.
Yes.
They both had both parents die. Then at least one of those parents was murdered. And
probably murdered. Germanicus in the case of Caligula and Ivan's mother.
And they both had to go live with the people who were probably responsible for the murder. Both of them actually started their reigns as heroes, and then both of them started to go bad when they got sick. And for Ivan, that was in 1553. And they thought he was going to die, and so just like his father, when he was about to die, he had the boyars come to swear allegiance to his son, who was an infant at the time. But unlike his father, there were some of the boyars who did not swear allegiance, or were just kind of like, let me get back to you, and they never did. Well, he got better, and he won happy, and so he had them executed. And
yeah, so let's talk about this just a little bit. So Ivan he's not ever going to trust the boyars due to his history with them. There was rumors, of course, that they had killed his mother specifically so they could replace her as regent. That's going to influence Ivan's opinion of the boyars. They are going to fight amongst themselves over who is going to control Ivan and his brother, and therefore Muscovy. That's going to be a strong part of Ivan's early life. That's not going to help his opinion of the boyars. And then when Ivan thinks he's dying and he tries to get the boyars to swear to his son, some of them don't do it. He's going to see that as a clear sign that they intend to betray his lineage and seize power for themselves. So I'm not saying it's okay that he had them executed, but I think we can all see where he was coming from with this based on his life's history. These guys had abused him, used him, tried to manipulate him, and they had refused his order that they should swear to his son, and he saw that almost certainly as them plotting to seize power when he died. So when he recovers, the first thing he's going to do is remove these disloyal traitors who were planning to use his death to seize his power, or his son's power in this case. So that should give us an idea where Ivan's coming from in this particular instance. And his entire reign, he is going to be in constant conflict with the boyars. He is never really going to get along with them. There might be one or two exceptions that he feels are loyal, but by and large, he sees them as a group of vultures just circling around him, waiting for him to die so they can take over. And he's going to act accordingly. Some people have compared him to Stalin. I think Stalin compared himself to Ivan, so I guess that's appropriate. And they talk about how both of them were characterized by their paranoia. But whereas I think Stalin earned his paranoia by being who he was, Ivan came by his paranoia honestly. He, from childhood, had people plotting against him, and he grew up in an environment where he knew that was the case. So he comes by his paranoia pretty honestly.
The next few years didn't really help matters. It didn't make Ivan any cheerier. First, his eldest son died, and then he began a war against Livonia, modern-day Latvia and Estonia, which blew up into a bigger war against the much larger powers of Lithuania, Poland, and Sweden.
Yes, that's the problem with picking on some of those countries up there, is you're very likely to bring a coalition in against you, which is exactly what happened in this case. And this is going to turn into a long, brutal war that is going to just ravage Russia's coffers. It's going to leave them struggling with money issues, supply issues. What he expected to be a short, easy war turned into a big, long, decades-long slugfest.
And that lasted for 25 years. Then the country was ravaged by drought and famine. Then his greatest friend and top general, Prince Kurbsky, defected to the Lithuanians. And to top it all off, his wife Anastasia died, likely from poisoning by the boyars, who...
Yeah, and like I said, there is pretty good circumstantial evidence that she might have died of poisoning. Whether it was the boyars or not, I couldn't say. And because of, like I said earlier, mercury could have been medicinal, not poisoning. The arsenic could also have been medicinal or used in dyes or other, in other ways that just where you get contact exposure. So you can't say definitively she was poisoned, but given everything that's going on, I would say there's a very good chance. Certainly, the evidence shows that it was possible.
Who Ivan had learned, or at least suspected, were embezzling money from him.
Yep.
It's no wonder the guy snapped. And so, on December 3rd, 1564, he up and left Moscow, leaving a letter saying that he was abdicating. He had had it officially. Well, the boyars were thrilled. They were now able to run Muscovy for themselves. Unfortunately, the people were not thrilled. They did still like Ivan. And so it was unruly, and it made it so that the boyars had to go to him and beg him to come back and be Tsar again. And he agreed under one condition.
And this is going to be the game changer right here. This is what changes everything.
He wanted to split the area up into two. The south would pretty much still be run the same way that it always had been, but then in the north, he would have complete absolute and unchecked power. He could take anything he wanted, he could confiscate estates, he could kill anyone that he wanted for pretty much any reason, and neither the boyars nor the church could do anything about it.
Yep.
And
the Oprichnina is what that area was called. It was an area that Ivan controlled absolutely by himself. The boyars and the church could not counteract him or oppose him in any way in that area.
Neither the boyars nor the church could do anything about it. And they agreed to this.
Yep.
And this is where Ivan IV really becomes Ivan the Terrible. One of the first things he did was to establish the Oprichniki.
Yeah, so the Oprichniki are the secret police that Ivan uses to control the Oprichnina, excuse me. And the people who can run it for him are the Oprichniki.
Sort of militarized secret police who terrorized the people for no other reason than that they could, though usually under the guise of rooting out traitors. They were headed by Malyuta Skuratov, who Ivan used to do his dirtiest of dirty work. Malyuta was put in charge of the execution of Ivan's only cousin and claimant to the throne, and he personally strangled Philip II, the Metropolitan, or essentially Archbishop, of Moscow.
If there was anybody terrible in all of this, it's that guy.
Then Ivan put him in charge of perhaps the worst thing that Ivan did during his entire reign, and that was the massacre of Novgorod. Now, the city was a relatively new addition to Tsar Ivan's domain, and he became suspicious that the leading citizens were planning to defect and place the city under the control of Lithuania.
Not out of the question. I'm not really sure of the details on that, whether that was really a thing or not. I kind of find it suspicious because Novgorod had had conflicts in the past with Lithuania, with Livonia. The battle on the ice is a good example of that. That was Novgorod versus Livonia and Estonia. Well, Estonia is part of Livonia, so I'm being redundant there. And some forces from places like Lithuania and Sweden. But yeah, Novgorod was a relatively recent conquest by Muscovy, and it had been a fairly prominent major city and a independent republic, the Republic of Novgorod. It was part of the Hanseatic League, which was a major trading network, primarily with Germanic states along the Baltic. So, yeah, certainly Novgorod trying to gain its independence from Muscovy, I can absolutely see that. Maybe an alliance with Lithuania, but I'd have to read more about that to really buy into it. Whether that's just Ivan's paranoia speaking or if that was something they were actually planning, I don't know for sure.
So in 1570, Ivan ordered the Oprichniki to go in and sack the city. Sort of a, if I can't have you, then nobody can situation.
Yep.
Oh, the lamentable outcries and cruel slaughters, drowning and burning, ravaging of women and maids, stripping them naked without mercy or regard of the frozen weather, tying and binding them by 3 and by 4 at their horse tails, dragging them, some alive, some dead, all bloodying the ways and streets, full of carcasses of the aged men and women and infants. It said that they would strap people to sleighs and push them down hills into icy lakes to drown.
Yeah, that one comes from, that was a story told by one specific first-hand account, but the guy who wrote that one, if I remember correctly, was prone to exaggeration, so that one has to be taken with a grain of salt. But this event itself definitely happened. A significant number of people were killed or injured, evicted, cast out, and other things. Typical atrocities that you get when an area like this is invaded by soldiers that really do not have any restraint whatsoever. I don't think I really need to go into the details.
A large portion of the population was killed, and it was remembered for generations. I suppose the only real bright spot, if you can call it that, of this entire period was that in 1572, he actually disbanded the Oprichniki, because it turns out that while they were great at fighting helpless peasants and old women, they were not so great when an actual army of Tartars invaded Russia, and they just completely melted away, and so the Tartars destroyed Moscow, burning pretty much everything to the ground except for the Kremlin. And that was pretty much the end of Ivan's unchecked power. He didn't really do much after that. He was a bit demoralized, I guess. He did get married a lot. He was said to have been married at least 6 times, possibly 8 or even 9 times. Again, kind of similar to Henry VIII.
Yeah, so why they didn't know for sure is because some of the later marriages may or may not have actually happened, and some of them may or may not have actually been legal. Actually, most of them were not legal, but we'll get to that in a second. But at least one of his later wives is generally believed to just be a fanciful story, and she may not even have existed. But at this time, you could only ever be married twice in Orthodox Russia. Maybe 3 times, I don't remember, but I think it was twice. I just can't remember if the third wife is a no-no or if the third wife was the last. One or the other. So anything after that, as far as the church would be concerned, would have been a non-starter. It wouldn't have counted. So that's why, for example, when you have the time of troubles and people accuse Boris Godunov of killing one of Ivan's youngest surviving son at that time, Dmitri, because he wanted to remove Dmitri from succession so that he could take power. Well, it wouldn't have mattered. Dmitri would not have been a legitimate heir because he was the son of, I think, Ivan's 4th wife, I think, and therefore would not have been considered a legitimate heir. He would have been considered illegitimate. So, yeah, that's why a lot of scholars don't buy the whole Boris Godunov had him killed because he was a threat, or that because he wanted the throne for himself. Dmitri was never in the line, at least not on a technical level. Anyway, continuing.
And then he raised sons and children, and his eldest son he raised to be a great general, and he was poised to become the next Tsar. But, unfortunately for him, his father, Ivan, still had one more terrible deed left in him.
He did.
On November 16th, 1581, he and his son had a disagreement, possibly over an immodest dress that the younger man's pregnant wife was wearing. This led Ivan to fly into an uncontrollable rage, and he hit his son over the head with his staff.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. This is an iconic painting of Ivan and with his son in the aftermath of this event. And I wanted to stop here because I mentioned this briefly in other videos, but I want to bring it up again here while we're looking at this picture. Because a lot of times when you see, I looked at some other videos on Ivan the Terrible. I couldn't find any really good ones, but I looked at a couple of them over the years. And almost all of them say Ivan murdered his eldest son or ran him through with his pointy staff. None of that really fits the actual story. The actual story is pretty much what Max said right here. Ivan got into an argument with his son, supposedly over immodest behavior or dress from the son's wife. And Ivan lost his temper and struck his son over the head with his scepter or staff. The story varies, but it was not cold-blooded murder. It was not premeditated murder. It was an act of passion. It was him losing control of his temper and just whacking his kid, which the Domostroi kind of says you should be doing, but not in anger. You should be doing it lovingly. Whatever. To correct your child or your wife or whoever you happen to be beating at the time. So the thing I want to get across is this was not a cold-blooded murder. This was an act of physical violence. It's inexcusable, but Ivan was crushed by it. He did not intend to kill his son. And I think this painting does a really good job of showing the real situation. Ivan is said to have done exactly what you see in his painting, crouch down, gather up his son, and cry out, "God, oh God, what have I done?" So let's get this idea that he was just some kind of a bloodthirsty man that murdered his own son because he wanted to or because he was terrible. And we need to kind of realize there's something I said at the very beginning. Ivan was very, very religious. And he was very, very, especially in these later years, might be why he didn't do a lot. He was very repentant for his behaviors. He felt that he had done wrong and that he might do wrong again, but he was trying to do better and he was trying to make amends. That he did give out an order, for example, that the names of everyone who had been murdered or killed in his name be brought to him so that he could personally pray for their forgiveness and for their souls as part of his own penance for his sins and crimes. So this is another side to Ivan that they don't talk about a lot. Most treatments on Ivan, especially if you see a short summary of his life on like a short YouTube video, tend to portray him only from the negative side, the Grozny side, the fierce, the terrible, but there was another side to him. He was very, very religious. He was somebody who understood that he was doing wrong, didn't like what he was doing, at least he felt some guilt over it, and he did at times try to do penance to earn forgiveness for his mistakes. So that's the other side of Ivan that we kind of need to look at and acknowledge. It's not ever going to remove the stain of the thing he did, but he was aware that he had done bad, and he did care that he had done bad, and made some efforts to try to do better and to try to earn some forgiveness. So I think that says a little bit about who he was. He wasn't always a monster. He was a monster that was struggling with it. It's kind of the impression I get when I read about Ivan. He was somebody who had a volatile temper, extreme paranoia, but he was trying to fight against it. So let's keep that in mind when we're looking at the life of Ivan.
His son collapsed, and he died a few days later. Ivan immediately regretted what he had done, and it pretty much destroyed him. Over the next 3 years, he didn't really accomplish anything. He's often credited with conquering Siberia.
It happened during his reign. Well, the first major expedition to Siberia happened during his reign, but he really wasn't directly involved. It was the Stroganov family that did that. And yet the same Stroganov family that's later going to have a French chef named a dish after them, beef Stroganov.
Simply because he was the Tsar at the time, but really it was done by the Stroganov family, who many centuries later would have a beef dish named after them. No, Ivan's terrible life was done. In 1584, he died, likely of a stroke, but possibly by poison, while playing chess. Unfortunately, because he had murdered his very capable elder son, the throne passed to his younger son, Fyodor, who was feeble-minded at best and never produced any heir. And so when he left the throne, Russia fell into a period of anarchy known as the Time of Troubles. And it only ended when a new family came to power. And it was actually Ivan's first wife, the one who was poisoned, Anastasia Romanov's great-nephew, Mikhail Romanov, who finally restored order and established the Romanov dynasty, which lasted until 1917.
Yep.
Now, even though Ivan was, in fact, terrible, even terrible people have to eat. And most of what we know about how he ate actually comes from the writings of an English diplomat who came in the latter part of his reign. He came to Russia and wrote about a feast that he saw. Ivan is served at his table on this manner. First, every dish is tasted by the cook in the presence of the high steward or his deputy. At the table, a taste of every dish is given to the taster, and so placeth it before the emperor. The number of his dishes for his ordinary service is about 70, dressed somewhat grossly with much garlic and salt.
That sounds Russian, yes. They like their garlic. And their sour cream and their onions.
After the Dutch manner. This service is sent up by 2 dishes at a time, or 3 at most, that he may eat it warm. First the baked, then the roast meats, then last the broths. The taster holdeth the cup that he drinketh in all dinner time, and delivereth it unto him with a way when he calleth for it. After dinner he layeth him down to rest, where commonly he taketh 3 hours' sleep.
Okay.
And this custom for sleeping after dinner is an ordinary matter with him, as with all the Russes. It's that after-dinner nap that I can really get on board with.
Yep.
That and the extensive amount of garlic, which is why I made sure to include garlic in these pirozhki, which should be ready to form. So once your dough has doubled in size, divide it into about 20 pieces, around 45 grams apiece. Then fold the outsides of each piece into the center and roll them into balls. Take the ball of dough and use a rolling pin to roll it into a circle about 4 to 4.5 inches wide. You want it nice and thin. Then take the filling, which should be cold by now, and add a little to the center of the circle of the dough, making it into a sort of line of filling rather than having it all right in the middle. If you've weighed the pieces of dough, you're looking to add about 3/4 of that weight in filling. So my dough balls were 45 grams and the filling was about 35 grams.
Okay.
You can, of course, just eyeball it as well. Once the filling is in, fold up the longer sides and pinch the dough together. Then, to make sure it's sealed, fold that dough in on itself in a line down the ridge of the dough and pinch the ends. Then flip it over.
That's the part I always have trouble with. I never get them sealed good. I need to practice that pinch.
And set it, sealed side down, on a lined baking sheet and repeat until all the filling is used up. Then brush on a light egg wash with either just egg or egg and cream and set it in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 205 Celsius to bake for 15 to 18 minutes or until they're well browned on the outside. And then let them cool for a little bit, but definitely serve them warm. And here they are. Cabbage and onion pirozhki fit for the table of Tsar Ivan the Terrible. I have to say, I'm really proud of how these turned out. They're so pretty.
Yes, they are.
The bread is so soft. Yeah, and you open it up and you just see all that filling in there. Let's give it a try. That is so good. The onion is dominant, it's nice and sweet, but the garlic and the dill really add to the flavor and give it some depth. But you can make, there are so many different types. Often today, this is made with hard-boiled egg in it, so you can add that if you want. There are also many of these that are deep fried. It's a different type of dough, and they would have also had fried versions even in the 16th century. The Domostroi does talk about that, but most of them were baked. It was just more common, and frankly, I think they're better baked than even fried. So I wanted to share one interesting historical what-if that I came across while researching this video.
Okay.
And that is, in 1570, Ivan the Terrible proposed marriage
Queen Elizabeth of England, yes, the Virgin Queen.
to Queen Elizabeth I of England. Now, partly, it's said that it was because, not that he loved her, but he needed to possibly escape. He was very worried about being assassinated, so he was looking for some place that would take him, and most of Europe did not like him. So England was the place to go, but seeing as she was notoriously the Virgin Queen and would never marry, she turned him down. Probably reminded her too much of her own father.
I'm not sure how accurate the proposal that Ivan made to Elizabeth I was. He did propose to marry a high-ranking member of the British gentry. That much I do know. I'm not sure how accurate the proposal to Elizabeth actually is. He did write to her, and when he didn't get his way, he did get quite rude with her. But I don't know that he would propose to her. I think he actually was proposing to just a high-ranking noblewoman, not to Elizabeth herself. I could be wrong on that, but I seem to recall reading that that is more a myth than truth. But again, I could be wrong.
Well, Ivan, being terrible, sent her a letter calling her names and saying that she didn't even act like a real queen and she was like a commoner and that it was actually the men running the country. And then he finishes it off saying that she was an old maid. So yeah, she really dodged a bullet there. But how interesting would things have turned out if that marriage had ended up happening?
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
quite interesting.
yeah, that is Ivan the Terrible. These, though, not terrible. These are freaking delicious. I'm so glad that I made like 2 dozen, and I will be eating all 2 dozen. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
All right. That was fun. That really was fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you maybe can see a little bit more nuance in Ivan the Terrible and the thing that he did do that absolutely warrant the name Terrible by the modern standards, but also understand why he may have ended up that way. A combination of well-earned paranoia. He really did have people trying to kill him, and possibly mental issues caused by things like exposure to way too much mercury and that illness. A lot of people, we talked about Caligula, but there are other examples in history of people completely changing character after a prolonged and serious illness. Sometimes for the better, if you escape the serious illness and you got a second lease on life, and sometimes for the worse. In this case, and in Caligula's case, it was definitely for the worse. So, and it might depend on what made you sick in the first place, which way it goes, as well as your just base character. But he's not as simple as a lot of people make him out to be. He's like Shrek. He's an onion. He has many layers. And it's worth taking the time to peel back some of those layers and understand who he was underneath all that and why he might have been the way he was. Anyway, we talked about that enough. I'm going into rambling mode, so I guess I'll just see you all next time. Thank you for, one last thing. Since I'm doing Yvonne, I decided I would go ahead and do a bonus video. So at the same time I'm releasing this, I'm also releasing Epic Rap Battle, Ivan the Terrible versus Alexander the Great. So I hope you guys enjoy that too. So see you next time. Bye-bye.